Continue. The afternoon presentation is entitled Faith and Science. And I will start by reading to you a story. You may have seen this, but let me share it with those who maybe have not seen it. An atheist professor of philosophy was speaking to his class on the problem that science has with God the Almighty. And he asked one of his new Christian students to stand. "Are you a Christian? Are you not, son?" "Yes, sir." "So you believe in God?" "Absolutely, sir." "Is God good?" "Sure." "Is God all-powerful?" "Yes." "My brother died of cancer even though he prayed to God to heal him. Most of us would attempt to help others who are ill, but God didn't. How is this God good then?" Student is silent. Professor continues, "You can't answer, can you? Let's start again, young fellow. Is God good?" "Yes." "Is Satan good?" "No." "Where does Satan come from?" "From God." "That's right. Tell me, son, is there evil in this world?" "Yes." "Evil is everywhere, isn't it? And God did make everything. Correct?" "Yes." "So who created evil?" The student can't answer. "Is there illness, immorality, hatred, ugliness? All those terrible things existing in this world, don't they?" "Yes, sir." "So who created them?" No answer from the student. "Science says you have 5 senses, and you use to identify and observe the world around you. Tell me, son, have you ever seen God?" "No, sir." "Tell me, have you ever heard God?" "No, sir." "Have you ever felt God, tasted God, smelled God? Have you ever had any sensory perception of God, for that matter?" "No, sir, I'm afraid I haven't." "Yet you believe in Him?" "Yes." "So, according to the empirical, testable, demonstrable protocol, science says your God does not exist. What do you say to that, son?" "Nothing. I have only my faith." "Yes, faith. And that's the problem science has." "Professor, is there such thing as heat?" "Yes." "Is there such thing as cold?" "Yes." "No, sir, there isn't." The lecture hall now has changed. "Sir, you can have lots of heat, even more heat, superheat, mega heat, white heat. But we do not have anything called cold. We can hit 458 degrees below zero, which there is no heat, but we can't go any further than that. There is no such thing as cold. Cold is only a word we describe for the absence of heat. We cannot measure cold. Heat is energy. Cold is not the opposite of heat, it's just the absence of heat." At this point, you can hear a pin drop in the auditorium. "What about darkness, Professor? Is there such a thing as darkness?" "Yes." "What is night if there's not darkness?" "No, you're wrong again, sir. Darkness is the absence of something. You can have low light, normal light, bright light, flashing light, and if you have no light consistently, you have nothing, and it's called darkness, isn't it? In reality, darkness isn't. If it is, were you able to see a darker darkness?" "So what's your point, young man?" "Sir, my point is your philosophical premise is flawed." "Flawed? How can you explain that?" "Sir, you're working on the premise of duality. You argue you argue there is life and there is death, a good God and a bad God. You're viewing the concept of God as something finite, something that we can measure. Sir, science cannot explain a thought. It uses electricity and magnetism, but has never seen, and much less understood, the other one. To view death as the opposite of life is to be ignorant of the fact that death cannot exist as a substantive thing. Death is not the opposite of life, just the absence of life. Now tell me, Professor, do you teach your students that they evolved from a monkey? If you're referring to natural evolutionary process, yes, of course I do. Have you ever observed evolution with your own eyes, sir? The professor is shaking his head now with a smile. He's beginning to realize where the argument is going. The student continues. Since no one has ever observed the process of evolution at work, and cannot even prove that the process is an ongoing endeavor, are you not teaching your opinion, sir? Are you not a scientist, but a preacher? Is there anyone in this class who has ever seen the professor's brain? Of course, the whole room breaks out into laughter now. Is there anyone here who has ever heard the professor's brain? Felt it, touched it, smelled it? No one appears to have done so. So according to the established rules of empirical, stable, demonstrable protocol, science says that you have no brain, sir. With all due respect, sir, how do we then trust your lectures at all? The room is silent. The professor stares at the student, his face tortured. I guess you'll have to take them on faith, son. That's it exactly, sir. The link between man and God is faith. That is all that keeps things alive and moving. I believe you have enjoyed this conversation. The student with Albert Einstein, a scientist who was demanding that God existed. So this whole idea that there's a conflict between faith versus science is man-made. I know my biologists' heads are spinning now. It's okay, I'll explain it a little bit. In the beginning, God made heaven and the earth was invisible and unfinished, and darkness was over the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and morning one day. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the water, and let it divide the water from the water." And it was so. And thus God made the firmament, and God divided the water under the firmament from the water above the firmament. So he called the firmament heaven, and God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning the second day. Then God said, "Let the water under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. The water under heaven was gathered into its places, and the dry land appeared. And so God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth the herb of grass, bearing seed according to its kind and likeness, and let the fruit tree bear fruit, whose seed is in it itself, according to its kind on earth." So it was. And thus the earth brought forth the herb of grass, the bearing of seed according to its own kind and likeness, and the fruit tree bore fruit, whose seed is in it itself, according to its kind on earth. And God saw that it was good, and so evening and morning were the third day. And then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven, or for illumination, to divide day from night. And let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years. Let them be for illumination of the firmament of heaven, to give light on the earth." It was so. Then God made two great lights, that light, the greater light, to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. So God saw it was good. So evening and morning were the fourth day. Then God said, let the waters bring forth creatures having life, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the heavens firmament. It was so. Thus God made great sea creatures, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their own kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. So evening and morning were the fifth day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, the quadrupeds, the creeping things, and the wild animals of the earth according to their kind. It was so. So God made the wild animals of the earth according to their kind, and cattle according to their kind, and all the creeping things on earth according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the cattle and all the earth, and over every creeping thing that moves on the earth. So God made man in the image of God. He made him male and female. He made them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the sea, the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every seed bearing herb that sows seed on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be for food. I also give every green plant its food for all the wild animals of the earth, and for all the birds of heaven, and for everything that creeps on the earth, in which is the breath of life. It was so. Then God saw everything he made, and indeed it was very good. So evening and morning were the sixth day. Now, you sat patiently. If you will continue to sit, I will read the rest of the Bible in about 4 months. But since you don't have time and I don't have time, your assignment is to read it on your own. Within your lifetime. Would be nice at least once. My New Testament professor at Holy Cross said the reading assignment this week is to read the New Testament twice in 1 week. Can imagine. If you want to be good at Scripture, you have to read constantly. And so I read it twice that week. I didn't do anything else but read the New Testament. Other professors weren't so forgiving. They wanted us to also practice our chant, get our church history ready, Greek lessons, whatever. But the New Testament was key, and so I spent the time. I encourage you to do the same thing. This is the creation story. This is what all of us learned growing up in Sunday school. And dare I say, in the public schools of America, until the late 50s and early 60s, when they decided that God no longer had a place. For centuries upon centuries, after the writing of Genesis, we have seen the same light and darkness, the same night and day. Have you ever stopped to look up at the night sky? Have you ever looked at the moon or picked out a planet or two? Can you find a few constellations based on our human mythologies? All of this can be seen with the naked eye. Have you ever peeked into a telescope to see the equatorial bands of Jupiter and follow the movement of its 4 major moons? How about the rings of Saturn? How about the Orion Nebula or a passing comet? If you have not done these things, you have missed out. Sir Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, was one of the most influential scientists of all times. His accomplishments in mathematics and optics and physics led to the foundations for modern science. He defined the laws of motion and universal gravitation, which he used to predict the movements of stars and planets around our sun. He also believed in a creator of the world. Quote, "When I observe the course of heavenly bodies through the telescope, my knees bend and involuntarily kneel in order to magnify the greatness of God, whom has thrown all these miracles into space." Close quote. Other scientists, Nicholas Copernicus, Johann Kepler, also made great contributions to science, and they were always aware of God's presence. From the Genesis account, we see that God created everything. Everything. Scientists around the world are working to discover the unknown secrets of creation. Exciting and amazing things are out there to be uncovered. The media, as I said, try to put them against each other. Instead of saying science and faith, or faith and science, or religion, they like to say science versus faith or religion. You can constantly see articles in the journals, newspapers, online, but just a few of them that I picked out. USA Today had a beautiful article called "The Bible versus Science." Wow, that caught my attention. It talked about the Grand Canyon. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? It's wonderful, isn't it? Postcards don't do it justice. You got to be standing there to look at what's there. Is it 6 million years old, or 6,000 years old, and the result of the great flood of Noah? I don't know, but it's there. In Kentucky, you can go to a city of Florence, and there they have the Creation Museum. It's a collection of fossils and dinosaur models, minerals, and other materials that demonstrate the scriptural accounts of creation and the Great Flood, that they are true and can be trusted. They say that the Bible is the ultimate authority. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution a couple of years back had an article, "Taken with Faith?" Question. It talked about the last tomb of Jesus. In 2007, there was a documentary that reported to have found the ossuary, the container that contains bones, of Christ. Wow. Is right? Wow. In the spring of that year, we were entering the Lenten period, and there was a documentary saying we have a box that have the bones of Jesus Christ. If that were true, I would be out of business. He would be out of business. The dean would be out of business. And we as Christians would be out of business. The bones of Christ? Wait a minute. He was crucified. He died. They put him in a tomb. He resurrected on the third day. He ascended into heaven on the 40th day. People saw him going into heaven. There are bones here? From where? Did he come back? In the Middle Ages? Where did these bones come from? And yet, people flocked to the documentary, believing that some scientist somewhere had found the bones. Nonsense. Oh, and if they did find the bones, can we take some DNA from the bones, the marrow of the bones, and clone Christ? Think about that for a minute. I love science. I'm a scientist. My degrees were in science. 2 of them. 20 years of medical research. The DNA prospect is a good around the same time, there was a man named George Jamal. He had discovered Noah's Ark. And not only that, but he had a piece of wood that was from the ark. Everybody was very excited. Evidence of an Old Testament event, the Great Flood. I have a piece of wood from the ark. It turns out that this California actor had gone in his backyard and taken a railroad tie from the train tracks and said this was part of the ark. And people believed him. Not everybody, but some people believed him. When I was in seminary, my senior year, the Gospel of Judas. The Gospel of Judas. They found something about 100 years ago that was the Gospel of Judas. And so what? It wasn't news today. Well, of course it was. National Geographic had it in one of their magazines and a documentary on TV on their cable station. Must be true. Must be something to detract us from our journey of Lent. These always show up at Lent or right before Christmas. Go to the newsstand. Don't they always have something right before Easter, right before Christmas about Jesus, the mysteries of the Bible? Was the Virgin Mary really a virgin? I mean, just talk about it, will you? And yet it's out there. But they always try to give some kind of scientific evidence to tell us that God doesn't exist, that somehow we're wrong. Other things that have been published in Scientific American, which is, it's an okay science magazine, but it's not really a specialty science magazine. But it's something I used to read years and years ago, and I occasionally now, because I travel enough, I get plenty of like frequent flyer points that eventually I get like all kinds of free magazines. Which magazines would you like to get? Because some of your points are expiring. So I get Scientific American just to read something scientific. There's all kinds of stuff from the scientific world that want to tell us that there's a problem between believing in God and science. There are lots of them. Another one from USA Today. There is always the mystery was the title. Why faith and science remain worlds apart. And this is what they wrote. I like this a little bit. Religion is about mystery. That's very Orthodox, is it not? The sacraments in Greek, mysterion, mystery. We don't know exactly what's going on, can explain everything, but we think we know sort of what's happening. Mystery. Science is about figuring out what works in the material world, right? You guys are scientists, engineers, whatever. Physicists, whatever. If you took physics, there's an equation, but that's not the Bible. There's an equation for what just happened. Is there not an equation? Of course there is. There's an equation for that action. That material thing that happened, there's an equation for it. It's not the Bible, just the bishop threw the Bible on the ground. There's a danger that science will ever deprive us of the... There is no danger that science will ever deprive us of the mystery. If someone worries about science conflicting with his or her religion, I draw a circle on a blackboard, it says, and all the stuff we can verify is inside the circle, and the infinite area outside the circle represents the unknown, the mystery. So science explains everything inside the circle. But science doesn't know what's happening out here yet. But the circle is always getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It understands everything in the circle. It doesn't understand what's out here. But it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. We had a discussion at lunch today that every 1.2 years, the knowledge base of the world doubles. Every 1.2 years. Can you imagine? Everything we know In another year, there'll be twice as much as that in all fields of knowledge. And yet, you never get everything within the circle. There's still stuff out here. The mystery, the unknown. When I was at Boston at seminary, there was a monk who was taking courses at Boston University. He was taking an astronomy class. And the professor challenged the monk, who obviously looked like a monk. I mean, long hair, long robe, he looked like a monk. He wanted to challenge his theology, his belief in God. And so he was showing images from the Hubble telescope. And if you have followed this at all, it's amazing what has come from these scientific devices, telescopes that are showing us galaxies that are so far away that it blows the mind. And show all these beautiful pictures that are created. And he's projecting a whole series of them on the wall. And he asks the monk, where is your God in all of this? And the monk, very quietly and humbly, as all monks are, unless they're crazy, excited monks, said, how far can your telescope see? And he gave him the measurement in billions of whatever light years. Is that the limit? He said, that's the limit. My God is on the other side of the limit. What a smart answer. You can't see my God because you don't have the eyes to see my God. He's a little bit further than your limit. The circle, he's at the edge. But the circle is a little bit further. That's the way to explain it sometimes. Does anybody know who Francis Collins is? Oh, biologists better know who this is. You know who Watson and Crick are? What do they do?
They're the ones that are kind of for the DNA and chemical issue.
When? Do you remember when? 50s, huh? 50s. There was a race by scientists around the world to give us the structure of DNA, the genetic material of life. And Watson and Crick were a couple of guys that were working together, and they had almost all the answers from the research that was available and being published. They had brought everything together. They did some of their own work, but they needed some proof. Stole it from another laboratory. You know the story? Of course you do, because you're a female. They stole it from a female's lab. She had some X-ray crystallography of the structure of DNA. That it was a helix. Two wrapped around, double helix. She never got credit. Those men, they're so bad. She's the real hero. She did the work on the side and confirmed what they thought. That was Watson and Crick. Francis Collins, now of the 80s and 90s, has been working on sequencing the human genome, to lay out the genetic material of humans, to tell us where everything is on the genetic material. That's who he is. He grew up a Christian, but then he became a scientist. And then he became an agnostic. There's something out there, I think maybe. And then he said, no, there's nothing out there. Then he started working with genetic material from the humans. And as he was doing his work, he figured out there is a God. And became a Christian. deep down, true believing. So you see a scientist who is trying to figure out the genetic material of humans is a Christian. He believes in God. He didn't allow the science to totally overwhelm his ability to say, we don't know everything. We know a lot. We're learning more. God has given us the wisdom to question, to unravel his mysteries. But we don't know everything. There is a God. He says in his book, The Language of God, which is his work on the genetic material. So what he's saying is that genetic material that creates humans is the language of God. God is speaking to us through the genetic material. It's not a clever idea. He wrote, the God of the Bible is also the God of the genome. He can be worshipped in the cathedral or in the laboratory. I remember what it was like being in high school, science class. I don't know what they do now in high schools in science class. But let me just give you a scenario and tell me if y'all have done this before. Have you ever worked in a science lab, looking through a microscope, and put a drop of water on there from a pond or a creek or something? What do you see? What's there? Everything. There are little animals floating around. There are little plants, protozoans, parameciums, doing their thing. Things with little tails. Volvox, sort of floating through the air. It's a whole universe where? In a little drop of water. How did those things get there? You don't know. Evolution. Of course. Seriously. That genetic material that's like this. And they're base pairs. The millions of combinations in every cell of a living entity that at some point signals to unravel and lay itself out, to duplicate itself, so that when the cell divides, the same amount of material will go into the two new cells. Is that the result of a Big Bang? That's what they tell us. That's the current theory. Big Bang is more than a TV show, which I have come to love somehow. They're geeky little science guys. And the girl. If it was just the geeky science guys, you probably would have never made it. You need the girl, the spice, to be there, to flavor it. But the Big Bang, that there was a point of light, a point of energy somewhere out there. Very dense. And at some point, it went out into the world. Big Bang. Some sound, something, flash, something. And millions of years later, there was a pool of water somewhere, primordial, they say, that from that life came. Seriously. Did you see how I was describing that point of energy? Very intense point of energy. How was I describing it? Physically, what does that look like? Huh? Don't we do this? Huh? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all they're right there together. There was a Big Bang. I'm sure of it. It's when God did this. And everything began. That chapter that I read, Genesis 1, was the Big Bang. Do we know more than what Genesis 1 tells us? Of course. We're smarter now. We're evolving in our knowledge. But millions of years later, there was this pool of, I don't know, amino acids floating around, some chemicals from an asteroid, I don't know, something, and all of a sudden life formed. Some proto-cell, something, unicell, something. And slowly it floated around in there for millions of years, maybe. And it kept dividing and dividing and dying and dividing, so it stayed alive. And then at one point it looked up at the edge and go, hey man, there's some out there. So it crawled out. You know what I'm talking about. And it looked around and said, I like it here. And then the quadrupeds on the land. Okay. I'll even buy that if you will allow me to say that God put his finger in the pool and everything started moving in whatever direction it needed to move. As long as God's involved somehow, I'm happy with it, whatever science comes up with. If it proves itself wrong eventually, and there are many things that have been proven wrong in science, that's okay. We were wrong. Go to confession and move on. Just keep God in the equation somewhere. Because he's in the equation. Your equation doesn't work unless God's there somewhere when it comes to these things of science. A couple of years ago, I Googled science and religion. 169 million responses. It's places to go to look about this thing. I even did it for Orthodoxy in science and found about 1.5 million. It's out there. It's being talked about. It's part of our culture, this discussion between faith and science. Another one of these journal subscriptions was Atlantic Magazine. And it actually had a 2-page ad. I have it here somewhere. There it is. A 2-page ad. And the ad was an advertisement. It says, does science make belief in God obsolete? Really? This is just a couple years ago. And what they did is they asked a bunch of different people, scientists, professional people, clergy, different people of society, philosophers, to answer that question. Does science make belief in God obsolete? I checked the other day to see if that website is still active, and that's all there. It is. For the college students, templeton.org/belief. You can find it there. At the time, they were doing just the 3 big questions of the world. They're now at 6 questions. So they've done a lot of it. And every participant that they ask is supposed to put together an essay answering the question. Here's one of them. It's a psychology professor at Harvard. Where do you think that one's going? Yes or no, God? No chance. Problem. Traditionally, he writes, a belief in God was attractive because it promised to explain the deepest puzzles about our origins. Where did the world come from? What was the basis of life? Can the mind arise from the body? Should anyone be mortal? And over the millennium, there has been a trend. The deeper that we probe these questions, the more we learn about the world in which we live, the less reason there is to believe in God. So the smarter we get, the less we need God. That's what he's saying. Start with the origin of the world, he says. Today, no honest, informed person can maintain that the universe came into being a few thousand years ago and assumed its current form in 6 days. I just read that. He must be talking about me. So I'm not honest and I'm uninformed, is what he's saying. To say nothing of the absurdities like day and night existing before the sun was created. understanding of light. This is the light of the world, not the sun. Nor is there a more abstract role for God to play as the ultimate first cause. In other words, the reason because of God. This trick simply replaces the puzzle, where did the universe come from, with the equivalent puzzle, where did God come from? God always existed. He didn't come from anywhere. Which reminds me of an episode of Star Trek, one of the movies. You guys probably know this one. Spock had a half-brother. Remember his name? Why would you know? I just saw him in that. Sarah. For you who have never seen Star Trek, just bear with me. He was a philosopher, his half-brother. And he was looking for Shakari, paradise. And he thought it existed at the edge of the universe. The Great Barrier, they call it. If we could get through the Great Barrier on the other side of the universe, we would find Shakari, paradise. And so they heisted the Enterprise and raced off to the reef. And when they got there, they thought they had found God. Everybody did. Spock, Kirk, Sarek. It turned out not to be God. But in their own mind, they thought they had found God. By their own doing, getting to the barrier reef. But they were still looking. This guy has already written it off. We don't need God. There is no God. We're smart enough. We can find the answers. Everything else happened because it happened. It's impossible for DNA structure to just come into existence. And all the other molecular things that you guys are studying about, just because. There has to be some, they say, intelligent being now. They use that intelligent design argument maybe a couple years ago. There has to be something more. Something more. He concludes by saying, scientific and scholarly understanding has increased exponentially. Remember, every year and so, doubling our knowledge. And belief in God has waned. No question. Fewer people believe in God. In the broadest sense, it's making the belief in God obsolete. And, here's the arrogance, we're better for it. This is where he nails his coffin shut. He doesn't even leave it as a possibility. The Roman Catholic Bishop of Austria, he wrote something like this. In all our scientific knowledge of the inner workings of things and our technology-based comforts and distractions, there seems to be no place for the still, small voice of God. In that practical, existential sense, science and technology seem to have pushed belief in God towards obsolescence. Or have they? In the innermost being, we moderns remain unsatisfied. Sooner or later, we face an existential crisis and recognize in our life something is broken, disordered, in need of redemption. The fact that we can recognize disorder, brokenness, and sin means that they occur within a larger framework of order and beauty and goodness. Yet the unbrokenness and disorder are painfully present. Yet brokenness and disorder are painfully present. If you look at the world we live in, you cannot disagree with that statement. Brokenness and disorder are painfully present. And the human soul by its nature seeks something more, a deeper happiness, a lasting good. Consideration of the order and beauty in nature can lead us to a something, the God of the philosophers. But consideration of our incompleteness leads us beyond, in search of someone who is the good for us all. And so science can never never make it obsolete, God. That's another science who said that. So I gave you the Harvard professor of psychology. I gave you another scientist. I gave you this was the archbishop, but the scientist says the same thing. A Nobel laureate in physics. He's the guy that would throw the pencil and he would have the equation for what's happening. As an experimental physicist, I require hard evidence, reproducible experiments, and rigorous logic to support any scientific hypothesis. That's true. You need evidence, experiments that someone else can do to confirm your experiments, and good logic to support the hypothesis. How can such a person believe in faith? In fact, there are two questions. How can one believe in God, and how can I believe that God even exists? And then he talks about the falsibility of things, and that scientific statements must be falsifiable. In other words, to really and truly prove a hypothesis, you'd be able to find that there are no negative results. You can't do that with God. It's impossible. By contrast, it says religious statements are not necessarily falsifiable. I might say God loves us and wants us to love one another. I cannot think of anything that would prove that statement false. God loves us, he wants us to love one another. There's no negative of that. Some may argue that if you were more explicit about what is meant by God and the other concepts in the statement, they might be falsifiable. But such an argument misses the point. It is an attempt to turn a religious statement to a scientific one. There is no requirement that every statement be a scientific statement. Do my scientists hear that? Every statement doesn't have to be scientific. Non-scientific statements are not worthless just because they're not scientific. She sings beautifully. He is a good man. I love you. These are all non-scientific statements, but they have great value. She sings beautifully. He is a good man. I love you. There's no science in I love you. These are all non-scientific statements that are of great value. The science is not the only useful way of looking at life. Try to remember that. It's a way of looking at life, but not the only way of looking at life. Well-rounded people use everything available to them. Here's a Muslim for you, just so we don't leave anybody out. He's a physics professor in Pakistan. Let's face it, the day of the sky god is long gone. Sky god. In an age of science, religion has been downsized, and the medieval god of classical religions has lost territory. Today, people pay lip service to trusting God, but they still swallow antibiotics when they're sick. In other words, if you trusted God, you wouldn't take medicine. Muslim-run airlines start a plane journey with prayers, but they ask the passengers to buckle up anyway. And most suspect that the people who appear to rise miraculously from death weren't really dead to begin with. These days, if you hear a voice telling you to sacrifice your own son, who did that? Who did that happen to? Abraham. Sacrifice who? His son Isaac. You would probably report it to the authorities instead of taking the poor lad up the mountain. The old trust is disappearing. And so here are some examples of this back and forth business. There are lots of them, but I won't go through all. It's just a beautiful debate based on some concerns of some scientists. But I show you some examples, and you can probably find others, of scientists who really and truly love their field and really and truly believe what their field is telling them. And some of them don't believe in God. And yet some of them do believe in God. And Francis Crick, who didn't believe in God, through his science, found God and became a Christian. And so you can be a scientist and a Christian. You asked earlier, now looking down writing a note, you asked earlier your question. What was the question again?
What was the turning point in your life that changed you from a professional career?
The moment of conception, where life begins. If you think for a minute that your life begins when you were born, I have news for you, that's incorrect. At the moment of conception. Scientists will tell you, when that sperm and that egg come together, and there's one egg usually, and millions of sperm, millions, just all over that egg, trying to get in, fighting their way. Some of the sperm are smart. They're going right for the target zone, the egg. Others are floating out here somewhere. Some of them, because of something that went wrong, their tail is deformed, so they're just going around and around and around and around, but not near the egg. But eventually, it comes to the surface of the egg, and something beautiful happens at the moment that one of those sperm gets through. In a nanosecond, it enters through the outer portion of the egg and fertilizes the egg. And then the egg changes its outer surface and doesn't allow anybody else in. Now maybe two will come at the same nanosecond and enter, but highly unlikely. And that life begins. It soon will become 2, and then 4, and then 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. I'll stop now. 256. I don't remember the rest. 512. And then it will do beautiful things. And it will continue for 9 months if it's a human. And a little person will be born. But early on, like day 13 or 17, there's a heartbeat. Tell me that's not life. It is. It's not a blob of tissue. Because it's convenient for someone to say it's a blob of tissue. Because if a blob of tissue, we can do things to it that we don't feel bad about. I've heard lots of confessions from women who took care of that little blob, never had that child, and they regretted their whole life. 30, 40 years later, they're still crying for something they never saw with their own eyes. But they knew what they had done. And so life begins at conception. Beautiful science. I mean, if you look at that stuff, it's like, wow, are you kidding me? It's a Big Bang result. Well, it's not. Unless that's the Big Bang, God snapping his fingers. And so how did I get to the area that I'm in now? As I was growing up, as a teenager, I had a calling for the priesthood. I was about 16, 17 years old. I was always close to the church. I had a grandfather who was a priest. I had an uncle who was a priest. And I always was close. But I also had this desire for science. And so in my senior year, it became of, well, are you going to theology school or are you going somewhere else? I think I'll go to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, study to be a doctor. Get my biology degree, try to get into medical school. So that's what I did. I took all those crazy chemistry courses, all those biology courses, all those physics courses. I know the equation for that. So, I don't remember exactly, but I think I'm pretty close. And I tried to get into medical school 3 times, medical school entrance exams, interviews, the whole gamut, the rigmarole that you go through. And 3 times I was told no, from multiple places. And so the third time, it was like, okay, look, I don't think God wants you to be a doctor. I think there's something else. He didn't say priest, doctor. And so I already had the degree in biology, so I just worked on that for 20 years. And I saw many, many things. I was in the cardiovascular field. I was involved with early development of balloon angioplasty catheters, stenting devices, lasers, cryoablation, internal defibrillators, pacemakers, everything. From benchtop testing to large animal to human applications, clinical trials, all of them. I saw people die and come back to life. 45 minutes, he's dead, he's blue. And then, back to life. That's a miracle. That 1 hour, if you can get it done in that 1 hour, you might be okay. But I saw it several times. And then it was like, okay, in 2000, I went to Alaska on a mission trip, OCMC, and went there with a team of about 10 of us total, and we were on a catechism team. We went to teach to the little Eskimo kids, Yupik Eskimos, the teenagers and the adults. Kids in the morning, teenagers afternoon, night, adults. Several villages of the Kuskokwim River, southwestern Alaska, and came back home. Next summer went back, stayed on another river there for another month, and came back. When I came back, it was time. Somehow I had been called again to the priesthood. It's very intense. So, well, whatever. I'm in your hands, God. Tell me. And so I gave up what I was doing in the research laboratory. I'd actually become the director of the lab. I had the basic science lab, and I was director of clinical research in the Heart Institute. So I had like 5 nurses controlling 35 different clinical trials for drugs and devices for cardiovascular medicine. I was up to here, not here, here. And I couldn't see how I could extricate myself, but I did somehow. God provides a way. And so I left my job after 20 years and went to seminary. And so for 20 years I looked at the physical aspects of the heart, and now I'm looking at the spiritual aspects of the heart. It's the same organ. And so I can actually name the muscle where the sins are hiding behind. Your heart. Hey, come from behind the papillary muscle. You don't belong. Okay? And so it's the same for me. Somehow it fit. One of my sort of lessons of life, I think, is no matter what you're doing in school, no matter what you're doing in your career, God has a way of transforming all that into whatever He wants you to do. Whatever it is. I delayed His plans, I think, for 25 years. But He got me where He wanted. But everything I did before helped me. In those 20 years, I went to Russia 6 times. I visited a lot of monasteries and churches in Russia. Who knew that one day I might be connected to those churches indirectly? Nobody knew. I didn't know. And so when the lightning bolt came, hey, we want to make you a bishop. I was thinking, you're nuts. Oh, you want me to be a bishop where? In the Carpatho-Russian? Who are they? I mean, that's how, I mean, when you're in your sort of inner group, you know, I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church. I heard about the Carpatho-Russians in church history. I didn't know anything about them, other than they were Orthodox. I had to study pretty quickly. You know, reading and taking notes and rereading and trying to find things. Everything comes into place. So don't think for a minute that just because you're going through something that may not be useful to you now somehow, God knows what He's doing. You just keep working so that you can do whatever God has planned for you. So that's how I got where I'm at. And in my, of course, my scientific experience, I never left God. He never left me. Never. Wonderful things. Science is such a cool field. When I see young people going to science, you made the right decision. Forget the business world. Okay, somebody's got to do that. Somebody here is a business guy. But, you know, the sciences are the really beautiful things about life. That's where the stuff comes from. Science created this. A field of science. As I was driving here yesterday, I was listening to the radio. They have, science experiments where the rat in Brazil is communicating with the rat in Kansas City. Just like that. And the rat in Brazil is telling the rat in Kansas City where the food is and where the water is in this complex that it's located in. How does that happen? They're not talking on the phone. They're not even texting each other. They're communicating through their brain activity through the device, which must have a transmitter and a receiver in both directions. But just think about that. And of course they say, well, if we're able to figure this out completely, just imagine what we could do with humans when we start putting these things in human brains. Wow! We'll put a little chip here and we'll tell you exactly where the food and water is. And we'll tell you where you can't go. And we'll tell you, you see what I'm saying? It can be for good or it can be for bad. But it's there. And you can't stop. And so next year when they announce the first cloned human being, don't be surprised. Don't be shocked. Don't think that the end of the world is coming because of that. The end of the world is coming because the Bible told us it's coming. In its current form. We don't know when. Any questions? No questions. When I was a seminarian, the Greek Orthodox have a monthly newspaper, and they asked me to write an article as a seminarian. It was for the youth, and the column was called "What's Up?" Back then it was, "Hey, what's up?" Whatever. Okay, so what's up with faith and science? I wrote a paper about this. I'll give you a copy of it. There's some things there about our church fathers. Basil the Great was a big theologian who talked about scientific things. There were physicians like Luke, the evangelist, was a doctor who wrote some things about scientific connections. The mercenaries, Cosmas and Demianos, 3 sets of Cosmas and Demianos, centuries apart from each other, physician brothers, who, because they thought God gave them the healing power, they gave it freely. They didn't charge anyone for that. And some others who were writers of the church. So we've always had a connection with science. The church has never said that they are opposed to each other. Science is what we understand. The stuff we don't understand, that's the mystery. That's what we're trying to do to solve, to understand. So, any questions? Anything? Nothing? Yes, sir?
Yes.
What?
What's up?
What's up?
We were talking a few weeks ago in an adult study class about the connection of the heart and the brain during when we're trying to pray, and discussing the "let us lift up our hearts." And is there scientific evidence behind that as well, the connection of the heart and the brain in our prayer?
There is a connection. In the Orthodox world, we have a word called nous. Nous is our mind, not our brain, our mind. And sometimes we confuse the two and say our nous is up here. No, our nous is down here. It resides within the heart. Let us lift up our hearts is let us lift up our nous. Essentially. To who? To God. For what reason? If we lift up our hearts, physically you should lean during the liturgy when you hear that. Let us lift up our hearts. Actually do this, so that your heart is somehow elevated, even a little bit. It shortens the distance between you and God, you and Christ. Because in the Pandokrator, cathedra of many churches, Christ is in the dome, let us lift up our hearts. We look up to him to shorten that distance so he can touch our hearts, can touch our nous, to give it some perfection. And so yes, there is a connection there, for sure. This is what's being purged at confession. Your heart, not your brain. Okay? Your brain is like that commercial, the older people know this. This is your brain on drugs. Remember that they were frying an egg? You don't know that. Do you know this? You've not seen this. It was before you were born. So there is that connection. But perfecting, purifying the nous is what we're working on. Another question. Yes, sir.
When I was in college, which was about 40 years ago, all my classmates purported to be agnostic and atheists and all that, you know, so smart and everything.
Yeah.
But, and of course, I was the only Christian in my dormitory, pretty much. It was
So you converted all of them?
No, that's all fine. They were adamant, yeah. Although years later, I hear some of them return to their ancestral faith, some Christians, some Jews, etc. But one question was, not the I can believe that stuff, but one question has to do with, a lot of people are in math, physics, and science, and they were saying, okay, they said, okay, if God designed everything, where's the error correction come? And no, hey, I'll believe your idea about God if you can show me where it's not random, that there's some design built in. And this is like 40 years ago, before this new design, intelligent design thing. And now, I did read recent years, I read something about P65 something or other, which controls the fact that when you have, is that meiosis, correct term? You have the splitting of the DNA. And this is
all right, biologists, you know their current information.
So maybe somebody can tell me the answer. Since you
I'm an old dude, the science is blowing me away.
But there's something which controls the process of the DNA splitting
Sure.
and putting it back. And so it's in that itself. I mean, I'm going to convince my friend in college back then, but...
As long as you don't say that P65 is God.
No, nothing like that. Would that be considered something? So my question is, in your discussions, your 20, 30 years of talking with people about faith issues, is there something which you, if only this were true, I'd believe in God? And if so, what kind of response have you ever come up with?
I mean, it's really hard to give somebody like one little thing.
Yeah.
But you have to give them examples where they can, of course, then try to think about it. But the one that if you can explain to me the stuff we don't know yet, why don't we know it? How did we get there? Okay? And rational, I mean, one guy was saying if we believed in a 6-day creation, I mean, the 6th day, what's day? Is it 24 hours? Who says it's 24 hours? It could be 1 billion years. In one of our dogmatic classes, one of the guys raised his hand, well, where do the dinosaurs fit in? They're there. It says large creatures. Leviathan. What was a Leviathan? It was a big dinosaur in the water. Loch Ness monster, if you will. Who knows? But sometimes we get caught up in this time thing. Time for God is irrelevant. He existed before time. So if he existed before time, it's nothing. When he chooses, he does. But it's hard to someone who's sort of died in the will not believing, because it's convenient not to believe. Because if you don't believe, then there's no need to worry about morals, because there's no need about worrying about paradise. I can do whatever I want. We have that in our society now. It's a free world. Go for it. You can go for it. But if there is a God, and you don't believe that there is a God, and there is a judgment day, you're in trouble. On the other hand, if they believe in judgment day, we believe there is a God, and there isn't a God, what did we lose? Nothing. Time? We didn't lose time. We still lived our life. Maybe we didn't do everything we would have done. But so what? See? Another question. Stump the bishop. Go for it.
Evangelism has often been tied up with signs and wonders as a way of making people sort of
mean, miracles are part of what happens on a daily basis. The question is, do we see them? Are we blind to them? Are they wow enough for us? I would say if you are driving along in 2 seconds before you got to the intersection, if you had gotten there 2 seconds before you would have been killed, somehow that's a miracle. I've made my cross many times in my traveling throughout the country. Trucks coming and it looks like it's going to pinch me up against the side of a mountain, and then somehow I survive it. My heart races, and then I make the sign across and say, thank you, Lord, for letting me live at least one more day. But the miracles, like I told you in the hospital, the guy's been blue for 45 minutes, he's dead. He comes back to life. I saw a miracle that day. I don't need any more. It didn't get reported in the newspaper. The only people that saw the miracle were the people in the room. And if there was somebody who didn't believe it, they said, well, it's because of us and what we did. Yes, you're right. But it could have just as easily been the other result. And we'd have done exactly the same thing, of which we have done, and the person has not. Wow, we're better today than we were yesterday. It just happens that that's the miracle. The fact that babies are even born is a miracle. I mean, that's like huge for any kind of creature. But people need something to wow them. What did the Jews say? Come down off that cross and show us that you're the Son of God. And then we'll believe. I mean, I've been with you for 3 years. I've been performing miracles for 3 years. You didn't see? You didn't hear? Now you want me to come off the cross? What, to satisfy you? You're still not going to be satisfied. Because people saw him on the cross, they saw him die, and then 40 days later they saw him walking around, and still, at the day of Ascension, some did not believe and left. I mean, what else you want? So some people are just never going to be convinced. Doesn't matter what you do. Nothing. But you have to experience. Be there. Being in churches is like a small miracle in a way. Because what's happening? We're taking some bread and some wine, and there's going to be body and blood tomorrow. That's a miracle for us. Not a resemblance of, the actual. That's what divides us from other Christians. Other Christians say, well, it's a resemblance, symbolic of. No, not symbolic of. It is. Or our religion is messed up. I'm not saying that there aren't some things in a religion, people acting in a messed up way. It's different than the religion, the faith. Another question. College students haven't said a thing. Here comes the first one.
As someone who will have a future in practicing in medicine, how, I guess, visually should I put God in my practice? As in, if I'm speaking to patients, should I say, like, with God on our side, we continue doing this? Or should should people in science maybe not just completely put God?
I think you're going to know your patient. And if your patient is this kind of God-fearing person, you're going to know it. Somehow they will express it. And so you can be able to express that with them. In a neutral way, probably, because they may not be Orthodox. But always speak Orthodox to them. And never criticize what is happening from them. If you see a patient who their family has put a little icon on the pillow, the door's open to really express it. But not in an overwhelming way. You don't want to overwhelm the believer or the non-believer. When I was working at the hospital, I was eating lunch. I just got my cheeseburger, I remember like it was yesterday. I'm sitting there in green. I've been working on probably either a pig, a dog, or a cow, I don't know what it was. And was still in greens. And so I sat down, and I got paged. Nobody's paged me. So I got up, go to the phone, the in-house phone. This is before we had text messaging and all this kind of business. And we need to go upstairs. There's a Greek lady here, and she won't go to sleep. I said, what do you mean she won't go to sleep? No, in the operating room, we're trying to give her the drugs, and the drugs are not putting her to sleep. I said, wow. Well, okay, I'm coming. I didn't know who this lady was. Until I got there, I saw her. She was prepped. I saw her face. I had a hat, a mask on. All she could see was this. She had no clue who I was. But I said to her in Greek, Yaya ήρθε η ώρα να κοιμηθείς. Grandma, the time has come for you to go to sleep. Boo. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I looked at the pre-op staff, who I knew, of course, from my experiences there, and they go, you're a miracle worker. Thank you. I went back downstairs and I had the rest of my cheeseburger. I was enough for her in a very simple way. She just needed to hear it in Greek, that it was okay to go to sleep. Because why? She was afraid she wasn't going to wake up. I didn't say anything more. I didn't say, O Theos μαζί σου, God is with you. No, I didn't say nothing. Grandma, it is time for you to go to sleep. Boom. I mean, like that. And literally, I raised my hands like this. And the nurses were laughing. I mean, it just takes a little bit. And so in your field, you will find those moments to deliver that message. Many times, just a touch of your hand on their hand puts them at ease. They trust you. They're just, hospitals are spirit places. And if it's an operation or a procedure, you know, am I going to wake up? I mean, life is like this when you're in the hospital. Anything you can give. But you'll be able to discern, because you've talked to them. They may say something. You may see their pastor or something, whatever. You know, be open to them. Unless you're in a hospital that prohibits everything like that. Find another hospital working. Don't be in a hospital that's God, not God-fearing. Another question. Did I commit? Yes, sir.
In the battle that the media is portraying, like between saying science versus religion,
Yes.
in particular, like in regard to evolution
Yes.
versus like creative or intelligent design,
Yes.
where as an Orthodox Christian, or how would we answer that question, like as an Orthodox Christian, somewhere in the middle, or who, you know, which side would we consider ourselves falling?
Don't take a side. We believe God created the heavens and the earth, everything visible and invisible, everything visible and invisible. That means everything. The electrons, the neutrons, the subatomic particles, the, what's this, Briggs part, what did they find? What was it? Yeah. The God particle. I mean, if you don't believe, why you put God on there? Obviously you believe it, because you call it God particle. Just tell it like it is. You don't have to, you know, go in there swinging. They're looking to swing a lot of them. And the atheists have gotten a lot of sort of wind under their sails now, and their wings, and they're sort of soaring around and being accepted and all that kind of stuff. One of them was Christopher Hitchens. You know, he was a big anti-God person. He's dead now. He got sick very quickly and disappeared from the landscape. I'm not saying that God punished him. I'm not saying that at all. But he's been silenced. He said some pretty outrageous things. You know, if you don't believe in God, fine. Live your life like you don't believe in God. But leave me alone. Let me celebrate Christmas. Let me say Merry Christmas. When it's Easter time, Pascha, let me say those things. And if you don't believe it, I don't care. That's your business. But leave me alone. Let me worship freely. Don't impinge on my faith. I spoke with seminarians last weekend in Camp Nazareth. Seminarians from all the seminaries except one or two. They came, about 25 of them. We had a beautiful weekend together there. And I essentially told them that they are the next wave of priests who are going to be coming into the field in the century, I believe, where Orthodoxy is going to be the refuge for everybody. We're the light changed much in 2,000 years. And when Christ created his church, there was one church. And for 1,000 years, one church. And then in the year 1054, it's the Eastern Orthodox and the Western Catholics. Two churches now. Today there are, anybody know how many Christian denominations? Wild guess. Anyone?
300.
300. Very good answer. Wrong.
Oh,
How
50
many?
more since you asked your question.
How many? What's that?
I said 50 more since you asked your question.
Not that quite that fast. Last year, Christianity Today said there were 43,000 different Christian denominations in Jesus Christ. 43,000. We had one, then two, then Luther came and got maybe 10, and now it's 43,000. Now how does that happen? There's a church somewhere in West Virginia, and tomorrow they're going to have an argument. And we're leaving this church. Another church. At a rate of 1.5 per day. We're adding at a rate of 1.5 per day. Now how in the world did we get to that point? And so when all that collapses, when the society reaches a point of there's nothing left but my God, they're going to go to the church that's still got its doors open, practicing its faith the way they've practiced it for 2,000 years. They're going to come not by the hundreds, by the thousands. And I told them this, get ready. We're not that far away, I think. People are already to the point of not believing their God. One day they will wake up and believe in God. They will look for the church that can save them, not the church that makes them feel comfortable. That's why we have branch points. I feel uncomfortable with you. I'm leaving. Where are you going? Stay here. Let's figure it out. No, I'm leaving. New church. Church of the eastern side of the river, halfway up the mountain. Baptist church. I'm not criticizing them necessarily, but that's an example of how crazy it gets. And so we have the true faith. We say that every Sunday. And since we have it, we have to practice it, and those that come towards us, we have to help them. Open arms. And I told them, I think in this generation, probably, we will see less and less of this jurisdictional visits. Very few people can speak Carpatho-Russian. Fewer and fewer people are speaking Greek. The Antiochians, even less. The people of America probably need to hear it in their language so they can understand what's being said. It sounds good the first time you go. Smells good, looks good. But if I don't have the theology every week in the different hymns, how can I know what to do? How can I feel comfortable where I am? That doesn't mean we get rid of everything. It just means target. Prepare for the target that's coming. And that's how they can have a Greek in the Carpatho-Russian church. They were bold enough to say, we'll take a risk. And one of their biggest concerns, I don't know, Father, were you at the meeting? Which meeting did you come to? Were you in Camp Nazareth, or did you come to Taylor? Or either one?
Camp Nazareth.
Camp Nazareth. It was asked there too. At that time, Father Gregorius. Father Gregorius, what do we tell our people when they ask us, is this guy going to try to make us Greeks? And I started laughing. And I said, you tell your people, at that time they were still your people, not my people. Now they're my people. You tell your people, I will not make them Greeks if they try not to make me Carpatho-Russian. Everybody laughed. And then I said, but I will eat your food. Which they laughed a second time. Because when you eat someone's food, you have accepted them. You don't say, I ain't eating that. I've never eaten any Antiochian stuff. Nobody did. So the only way to get through Lent is to have some of that. Shawarma king. And so it's coming. That wave of people is coming. And so the seats that sometimes are empty on Sundays are going to be packed. And those little churches that are just barely hanging on, if they'll just hang on a little bit longer, they're going to be packed. That's my feeling. I could be wrong. 30 years ago, I maybe said, hey, they're coming. They're coming. You're like John the Baptist in the wilderness. They're coming. I'm telling you, he's coming. They're coming. Another question. Yes, sir.
I think a follow-up to that.
Sure.
One of your roles through your journey of life has been president of the parish council.
In 2 communities.
So for those that are here, the future leaders of the church,
Mm-hmm.
in a layman sense, what advice would you give? As, you know, if I knew then what I knew now, what advice?
If I knew then in college what I know now, it would have been a different experience.
But for the growth of the church,
Yes.
for us to
I mean,
assist-
for the growth of the church, you have to understand. When you're in the church, all of us have a role, some role of service. Diaconia means service. And so there'll be opportunities for you to take leadership roles. You can be catechism teachers, which I was one for 15 years. I taught the 11th grade. I had anywhere from 25 to 40 every year. Big school in Charlotte. The cathedral had 1,200 families, 500 Sunday school students. So it's big, okay? But you can be a catechism teacher, you can help in the choir, you can help with baking, you can be a parish council member. And it's important that we always have fresh blood on boards, always. New ideas, new energy, new zeal to serve. And so you have to serve. When time comes, you have to figure out where you're going to serve. You're in school now, okay, fine. But in a few years, you're not going to be in school. You're going to be somewhere established. You're probably going to be married. You might have a first kid on the way. Or you might be continuing something in graduate school. Eventually, you'll get out. You have to find time to serve. You know, something. But parish councils, it was a joy. 3 years of the cathedral as president, and then as soon as we finished, we said, we're going to start another church. And I went to the other place. Not for anger, but because we needed to grow. 1,200 families, remember? So we were busting at the seams. Nowhere to put people. My Sunday school class the last year was a vagabond class. Sometimes on the stage, sometimes in the basement, sometimes in the library, sometimes outside. Because we didn't have nowhere for us to go. We're always moving around. But eventually, you move on. We established a new church in Holy Trinity, the parent church. The mother church, St. Eustatius, formed with 62 families. There's now over 500 families there. And it's actually an Hagia Sophia downscale. So it has a very similar type of structure here. Very Byzantine. Iconography is unbelievable and stuff like that. But it was nice to be part of that as parish council president. And Sunday school teacher there too. And choir. We did it all the first years. When you're a small community, you have lots of things to do. There's always time. But step up. Somebody asks you to serve, serve. You're not going to lose anything. You're probably going to help. They'll be excited to see young people coming. Another question. On a totally different subject, anything. Yes, sir.
Is there any scientific evidence that supports, like, spirits exist?
Spirits?
Spirits, or...
I mean, when you say spirits, you mean like ghosts?
Not like ghosts, I guess that's possible. But, like, I'm thinking...
I will tell you,
Go ahead.
what were you thinking?
I don't know, like, from, like, the physics aspect of the different, like, dimensions and, like, things that we can't see that are going on that we know exist, like, you know, particles and electrons and all that.
Hmm?
But at the same time, like, for like a second dimensional objects, like, they don't know. I mean, they're not real, they're not animated, but they wouldn't be able to see a three-dimensional object. Same way, if I told you, I want you to draw a four-dimensional, five-dimensional, six-dimensional object, you'd be like, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah,
Gregory
my head
is not-
couldn't fit around it.
Yeah, so in that aspect, is it possible that there's spirits all around us, but our minds aren't allowing us to see them?
I will say yes. Here's the example. Tomorrow, all over the country in churches, babies are going to make sounds. You're familiar with this probably. Child crying out in church service.
Okay.
The mother getting embarrassed and going out the door. Little old lady going shh, shh, shh. Something like that. Whenever I see that, I tell the mom not to go. Stay. This child hears the priest screaming, hears the bishop screaming, hears the chanters screaming, hears the choir screaming, and we want it to be quiet. But my theory is, especially when they go, ah, 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 they see an angel that we are blind to. That from their innocence, if they see them flying around, which we know they're with us in liturgy. That's what we say. That's what we pray. Yet they see them and we don't. One example. So those spirits, if you will. On the island of Corfu, Carpatho, Saint Spiridon is there. Saint Spiridon, 4th century saint, they have his body, okay, relic, whole body. It's a little ashen in color, but it's there. And they put shoes on him, slippers. Many people have seen him walking around the island at night. Spirit. Couldn't touch him, but he's there. Physical evidence. Every quarter they have to change the shoes because they're worn out at the bottom. Physical evidence. Spirit. People who see. Okay? Now, 3 of us could be walking in the group and only one of us see him. So there's something about us who see him as opposed to the other 2. Maybe we're in the right spiritual frame of mind. I don't know. On Manathos, for 1,000 years there have been no women there, except the Panagia. It's her garden. You might have seen the icon where she's standing on Manathos and the 20 monasteries are at her feet. That's her place. The holy men see her many times walking. They don't touch her. There's nothing to touch. The Spirit is there. And so, yes, there is evidence. Have we put it in a bottle and studied it scientifically in a lab? No. But we also have weeping icons where they have taken the fluid that's coming off the icon and put it in a, what would it be, a spectrophotometer? Do they still have those in chemistry? Yeah. And tell you what the structure of it is, and they